Chapter 98. You're all idiots. Lexi Roberts, smug bastard, said this while examining Alden, Lute, and Hoyu on Monday morning. It was 6:45, he'd just come in from a run, and he looked disgustingly energized standing there drinking an iced black coffee from the campus shop. I got up at 2 o'clock to use the bathroom, and none of you were here. Con and Medi's group decided to go all the way down to the stadium in F. Hoyu groaned while he trudged across the kitchen toward his slow cooker to see a spell performance. It took a couple of hours to get back through all the traffic. I regret it. I regret nothing, Lute mumbled into the top of the dark wood table that they'd chosen to match their Huntski Lodge theme. I was eating mochi in a tub surrounded by beautiful, friendly rabbit girls when the volley ended at 1. Were you? Hoyu asked. Of course he wasn't, Lexi scoffed, rolling his eyes. Without looking up, Luke pointed across the table at Alden, who was trying to will himself awake while he chewed on a vegan protein bar the North of North Gym recommended. It was supposed to taste like cookie dough. I wonder if whoever made this has actually eaten cookie dough, or if it's just a phrase they've heard people with taste buds say before. He swallowed the chalky, artificially sweetened monstrosity. He was in the tub. We calculated it at one point, and he spent almost 5 hours yesterday in tubs. He's the cleanest person on campus. Alden's intake friends are excellent. I've changed my vote about letting guests come over if those are the guests. Oh no, said Hoyu, staring into his slow cooker at the oatmeal he'd put in last night. I don't think this is right. He dug a spoon into it, and when he lifted it, an oatmeal and dried fruit disc came out. I think I need to add more water. It slid off the spoon and hit the counter. Did that just bounce? Lexi asked, blinking at it. Alden nodded. That was a definite bounce. Line of asterisks. Maricel was already in the lecture theater by the time Alden made it to preparatory sciences, and when he went over to sit with her, he was relieved that she seemed at ease. They talked about homework until Finley arrived and turned the conversation to their upcoming gym class. Whatever we do, I want to make a proper show of it for the instructors, he said, ripping open creamers and sugar packets and pouring them into a hot tea. You know? I don't want them to think, we made a mistake with that one. He's not quality material. Something tells me you won't have that problem, said Alden. You never can be sure. At the party, when I told Medi I was in this course, he said it was for the remedial students. Did you two know that? Yes, Alden and Maricel both said. What's that about? I never was a remedial student before. Not top of my class, but never the bottom either. Well, I suppose we're not the worst of them. They didn't even give Jeffy the option to test out at the end of the quarter. He has to take it now and next term. He chugged his tea, then stared down into the cup. I think I need another. After that, it was off to engaging with the unexpected. Alden sat beside Andre, in what he privately thought of as the B-rank section. The discussion for the week would be on a series of 3 different superpurchaser incidents. There were so many examples for instructor Marion to draw on that he hadn't been able to limit himself to just one. All right, said a third-year girl, leaning back in her chair. Before he gets here, we all agree that the correct response to the chaser-turned-flasher who visually assaulted the hero is just a strategic accident with a spell impression, right? Can't flash what you don't have, said her friend, holding up a hand for a high five. Several people laughed. A couple sighed. I'd love to strategic accident a lot of them, a boy said. It would solve at least half of the issues we discuss in this seminar. Andre muttered under his breath in Polish and shook his head. He wasn't much of a talker in class. Alden found it surprising now that he'd seen him at the B-list, where he was quick to share ideas and eager to chat. This was a discussion-based course, so Andre couldn't be completely silent. But his usual habit was to share 3 opinions, each spaced about 20 minutes apart, and then fade out of the conversation again rather than ardently defending his point. Alden didn't know if he disliked arguing in general or if it was the particulars of this class and its participants that made him keep his head down. The girl who was always typing away on her phone on the opposite side of the room suddenly said, "Knock it off with the Stratak jokes." He's coming. A few seconds later, Instructor Marion breezed into the room. Morning everyone. Good morning. The use of strategic accidents had been banned at the beginning of the quarter. Anyone who mentioned accidentally doing violence to fix problems got thrown out of class and marked absent for the day. Not because violence was never the answer. Violence was, according to Instructor Marion, a valid tool and a subject worthy of serious and respectful consideration. But it comes with consequences, he'd said last week after tossing a guy out into the hall. Planning to use violence and squirm away from those consequences by saying, "I had a little oopsie," is not an acceptable approach to engaging with the unexpected. Alden had wondered what kind of lunatics he was going to school with that made it necessary for that to be a class rule. Until these superpurchaser scenarios. There was this one married couple who made money videoing working superheroes up close and personal. Their country didn't consider their actions to be interference, so they couldn't be prosecuted. But they liked to run into the path of oncoming spells and projectiles to get unique footage for their channel. Some of the unique footage came from without having to perform dangerous stunts to dodge them. They were creating circuses on purpose. It wasn't like they deserved to die, but they did deserve to be locked up in a punishment closet so that they could engage with the darkness of death and gain knowledge of what they'd done wrong. Alden had written this down in his private notes as the Clepak solution. Having it there was his way of venting, but he had enough sense and self-control not to present it to a human audience. He pulled out his laptop and went over his less private notes. In prepping for this class, he had decided to try to dodge the big moral questions everyone liked to fight about. After everything that had happened with Bo over the past week, he just wanted to quietly figure his own way through those things rather than having 20 different opinions flying at him, all of them presented with a vibrant certitude that made him feel lacking. Instead, he wanted to talk about the complications presented by superpurchasers in general, and since the best way to steer conversations was to start them, he raised his hand. I think we should discuss how superpurchasers themselves aren't unexpected. Once a hero or a team has stalkers, they know they are going to appear at public events or whenever action is taking place somewhere the chasers can get to in time. Their presence is a given. It's only the exact type of chaos they'll cause that's hard to anticipate. So we should talk about how knowing a difficult incident is more likely to occur than usual changes a hero's preparation and response. Andre looked up. I agree. We should talk about strategies for. How do you say? Composure maintenance greater than during frustrating moments that are caused by people a hero might have personal problems with. Translation for you all, said the girl with the phone. The bees want to talk serious business this week instead of penal rights. Penal rights are pretty serious, though. My rights in that area matter a lot to me. Instructor Marion blinked around the room. What exactly do you all mean by penal rights? Have you been discussing legal systems? Yes, Instructor. That's definitely it. We think the law should do a better job of protecting superheroes from civilian interference. Line of asterisks. I call this one bad long arms that make flower shapes, greater than Luke whispered, leaning forward on his learning cushion and holding out his hands to show Alden a series of signs. They were in the classroom for conversation IV, and they were alternating between talking about the assignment whenever Instructor Rao was paying attention to them and talking about word chains when she wasn't. Alden watched Luke's wiggling fingers closely. And his wrists, elbows, and shoulders. Luke hadn't been kidding when he said the chain was difficult. He'd been doing a shortened version of it last night on the bus. The full gesture said that Alden would be practicing involved a lot more motion. Blossoming tentacles. Greater than Alden suggested, texting him the English translation at the same time. Luke liked to name his motions himself so that he could remember them more easily. Alden knew perfectly well that the Artonans had their own names for common hand signs, but Luke's way had some benefits. There was a good chance that blossoming tentacles was going to stick in Alden's mind better than whatever the real name was. Blossoming tentacles. Greater than his tutor repeated, grinning at him. Luke was wearing his toucan shirt with a green eye patch, and his high tops were in his lap. He had decided not to give the shoe victimizers any more opportunities. Alden repeated the gestures, and Lute gave him an odd look. Wrong? Greater than Alden asked. Not very wrong. Do it again. Less fast. Greater than. Alden started the sign at the level of his forehead and drew his arms down through the air as he went. Stop there. Greater than. Lute reached out and adjusted the angle of the first knuckle on his left middle finger. Like this. Go. Less fast. Greater than. Alden started back. Stop there. Greater than. Lute rotated one of his wrists slightly outward and adjusted the distance between his hands. Go. Greater than. Lute had completely forgotten about behaving like they were doing the assigned work. He got up on his knees to stare even more closely at Alden's fingers. But Instructor Rao just sighed and walked past them when she did her next round of the classroom. Alden supposed she was grateful they were some of the only students not slipping other languages into their sentences today. Stop. Do it from the beginning again. Greater than. When they left 30 minutes later, Lute watched Alden take his shoes from his cubby and sniff them. You think they're going to get you since they couldn't get me? He asked, tying his laces. I see no reason not to take some precautions. Alden shoved his feet in. You've got a lunch break now? An hour and 15 minutes. Do you want to go back to the dorm and practice more? Alden looked up. I thought you had class. It's theater, and the instructor lets us play around half the time. If I don't skip performance days and I do the homework, he's not going to care. Lunch back in their room instead of in one of the cafeterias sounded good, and Alden didn't want to refuse help if wrist rotation and knuckle angle were going to be important components of getting more complex word chains right. They headed back, and just a few minutes later they were walking into their apartment. Living on campus is so convenient, Alden said. Our plus commutes down to intake were getting really old. Yeah, for the past few months I was only living about 20 minutes away if the buses worked out, and that was still a pain. Lute wandered over to look in Hoyu's cooker. He's trying something with chicken and onions. It hasn't gone to hell yet. Until recently, I was cooking 2 meals a day every day, said Alden, grabbing a steamer bag of frozen mixed veggies and tossing it into the microwave. Using ingredients mutated by a chaos field. Sometimes it even tasted okay. I've decided to believe in him. He will master the electric soup pot. He opened the cupboard and reached for a can of chickpeas. Get me some noodles while you're there. Lute's personal food shelf, because Lexi did not believe in shelf sharing, was below Alden's. It was 90% an instant noodle collection and 10% condiments to enhance the instant noodle collection. Alden selected a package that was supposed to be flavored like an exotic Lorch delicacy and set it on the counter. Your hands, said Lute, dropping his bag on the floor and plopping down in the chair. They are slightly enhanced? They are. I thought so. Alden was surprised at the delight in his voice. Mine too, said Lute, holding up his hands. You've got your dexterity boosted. For them especially. You see it in the music program a lot. And with some people who love handicrafts. I wasn't expecting it from you. His curiosity was obvious. Alden started to deliver the lie he prepped for the interview committee in case they asked why he would waste his limited point supply that way. Quicker, nimbler hands would have helped me out with tasks at the lab on Munthegund. It made them feel like a priority when it was time to affix. He had decided that was better than blaming the system and saying it had chosen and applied the points in an unusual way without his input. Doing so would imply that this particular stat allocation was important for his skill. It might send people like Instructor Plim on a wild goose chase in an attempt to figure out what it meant. I don't want to lie to Lute, though. This weekend had been fun. Last night had been fun. Lute had volunteered to tutor him. Well, so what if you don't want to? You don't know him well enough to tell him the truth. You don't even know him well enough to let slip that you've got something mysterious going on. Was there any part of the truth he could share without potentially ruining his life? I like it, he said finally. I know all of us in the hero development program are supposed to be brutally practical about our stat allocation and talent selection. especially if we're not S's. But I decided to boost my hand speed and dexterity for personal reasons at first, and now I like it so much that I'll probably do it again the next time I get the chance. For more than the original reason. It's an aspect of my powers that I enjoy in little ways all the time. I made a typo on my laptop the other day, and I suddenly realized I'd been speed typing for over an hour without a single one. Luke nodded. The points I've got are fully baked now. All the handhead stuff is refined and settled. I basically never miss a note on any normal composition. It makes it feel like the years I spent practicing prior to a fixation were a waste, but if I'm not agonizing over that, it can be really fun. And I've learned a lot of card tricks. And I bet I'd be a great pickpocket. I got all the high scores on a pinball machine in intake. That's cute. There's a secret arcade on the Legion campus. The games are weird since they're all custom made, but you should come with me sometime and watch me dominate the uni students. How fast are you? Not the absolute fastest compared to a bunch of uni gamers, but I don't lose much at all. The system wants chainers to be very good with our hands and with pattern memorization. It barely gave me any points to spend how I wanted. Well, yes. Those would be the enhancements that make you better at chaining. Plus something for his voice, too, I bet. Maybe his hearing as well. Chainers would be amazing spellcasters if they had authority senses. And also, it's a perfect class for a musician, Alden said. The microwave beeped, and he pulled out his vegetables. In some ways, there was an undercurrent of sadness in Luke's voice. Before Alden could ask about it, he cleared his throat. But about your hands. Since they're way better than I thought they were going to be, and since you've actually got a surprisingly good memory for signs, did you think I was dumb? No, but I thought we'd spent several hours going over the macro gestures. And you've almost got them already. So we can finish those off while you eat a can of beans and an entire bag of cruciferous vegetables with a bunch of raw garlic on top. Are you punishing yourself or the people who have to sit beside you in class? Alden kept mincing his garlic. He was having mock thunder lettuce for lunch. It's healthy. Not socially or spiritually. You're about to eat noodles flavored with something that looks like an alien dragonfly. They're nutty. Over their lunches, Luke went through the signs for the chain again, and in between slurps of noodles in a suspiciously gray broth, he corrected Alden's form. The word chain had no official English translation. Luke was calling it self-mastery. The Artonan title was more like My Body Becomes My Assistant. I'm pretty sure Keiko calls this one gracefulness, said Luke, reaching across the table at just two of Alden's fingers. Unless she's using that name for a slightly different one. Are your arms getting tired? No, I'm good. Luke sat back down and watched him. I tried to teach a couple of people some word chains when I first started school here. My roommates. And they were both mad when they got them almost right, and the chains still only worked like 10% of the time. Even though I warned them. Those weren't even difficult like this one. You're not going to blame me if you spend a couple of weeks studying and it's a bust for you, are you? Nah. The first time I actually did a word chain right, back in February, I had a pissy fit about what a pain in the ass they are. I thought I'd been doing them correctly before and they just didn't have very noticeable effects. I was in a class to learn them and everything. Then I actually nailed it, and I realized they were supposed to do a very obvious magical thing. You must have had a terrible teacher if they didn't warn you. She had cheek implants, and she'd had her hairline lasered back a little. So I'm sure she was trying to be authentic. Luke's expression turned pained. Well. Anyway, what was the chain? Peace of mind. I've got it down now. That's a good one to learn. It's weak, but it's good because it's weak. The higher level chains that do similar things can really mess you up. Alden did not doubt it. He paused again so Luke could show him a specific flicking motion. Then he said, I was saving the peaceful half of that chain for myself, and Hazel made it snap back on me. I'm 99% sure it was her. Luke's lips pursed. So it was her, said Alden. Due to the tattoo above my butt I can't share. It was totally her, said Alden. I knew it. It was too much of a coincidence for her to be standing right across the street when it happened, and then she was all smiles and, "Hi, Alden." And I. Ugh, why? I gave her the class. I haven't done anything to make her mad at me unless it was leaving her to a fix by herself, and I've thought about it way too much, and it was weird of her to expect me to hang out with her longer when she was already interrupting my friend's funeral. She didn't even say sorry for your loss. Lute was cupping his chin in his hands and nodding in overly dramatic sympathy. Alden suddenly realized how he must sound. And his hands were still in the air, halfway through blossoming tentacles. He shoved down his annoyance and lowered his arms. "Sorry. I didn't mean to rant. I'll shut up about your cousin." "No," Lute cried. "Don't shut up. You're just getting started. I want to focus on practicing. And I know it's not a huge deal. It's just..." Her pressing the "Get Do" button on my word chain felt so childishly fucking mean. It's like she saw I'd spent hours building a sandcastle for myself, and she walked over and stomped it. Only the sandcastle was a magical effect I'd prepped for my mental health. He sighed. "Am I a clueless jerk? Is there some friendly reason to call in someone's word chain? In public? Without asking? There's a list of skills possessed by my family members I've agreed not to disclose. I can talk about some partially, others fully, and others not at all. We have this Allah-ordained brand to uphold. 90% of it is just secretive bullshit for the sake of secretive bullshit. Which she loves. I mean, being bound to secrecy is part of our mystique at this point. So don't buy into the drama. Word chains are common sense compared to most magic. And so in a lot of ways Chainer is a common sense class. Lute stirred his noodles. When I finally affixed and got access to the deep dark powers of the Vura line, I said, "That's it." And I don't think I've ever offended my grandmother more in my life. Which is a shame, because I wasn't even trying right then. I was just surprised that we were so much less spooky than I'd been led to believe. "Spooky? Chainers always get more than they pay for," said Lute. "Your chain failed. Did you make a Vura mad? And my personal favorite is probably, fate always smiles on the chainer last." Are those common sayings? Alden couldn't imagine what it must be like to have family-specific cliches. You don't hear them every day, but you do hear them. So I was somewhat underwhelmed when I actually became a full-fledged Vura. He shivered. And then I let my guard down and walked face first into the 10% of being a chainer that actually is insane and spooky. Anyway, that's a humiliating story for Never. You asked if there was a friendly reason for someone to, hypothetically, call in someone else's debt without asking them first. And my answer is the common sense one, nope. Unless your friend is bound and gagged and the beach police are coming, why would it ever be nice to kick over the sandcastle they spent 3 hours 4 minutes and 11 seconds building? I suppose a chainer would know the duration of common chains down to the second. Wizards can do it, by the way, Lute added. I can tell you that. I don't know if all of them can, but my boss and his co-workers can complete other people's chains prematurely and by force. Not friendly at all, said Alden. It's usually not. But when they do it, it's also not without purpose. He'll almost definitely tell you what that purpose is when we call him together. And if not, you could probably ask any wizard who you feel comfortable enough around. Allah's got that particular word chain wrinkle on the do not disclose list because, like I said, KG for the sake of Kaginess is her modus operandi. But it's just a fact of life for Atonans who use major chains. They finished their lunch and went through the signs for the chain several more times. While he was correcting Alden's positioning during the last repetition, Lute said, You said Hazel tried to talk to you. I have no comment on her powers, but I probably told her to make friends with you and bring you over for a visit. Or Hazel heard her talking about you and decided to get in on it by herself. I guessed that, Alden said flatly. She failed. She might have failed on purpose. Or she might have tripped over her own personality. She might really still be mad at you, too. For the funeral thing. He adjusted Alden's wrist again. Hazel grew up devouring my grandmother's attention, and ever since she started getting a lot of Alia's time instead of all of it, it's like she's starving. He placed his hands on the table and watched Alden finish the set. She wanted you to see her faint. What? When she affixed. At the funeral. She wanted someone there to see her faint. Was she scared of it happening? It hardly ever does. No, she wasn't scared of it happening, Luke said. She wanted it to. It happens more often to S-ranks. The system needs additional time for whatever reason and knocks you out for it. Sometimes it talks to you. I am very familiar with that. Luke continued, fainting during affixation and getting a meeting with the system doesn't mean you're going to be a better about, but it has specialness connotations. Hazel grew up. Okay, she had a messed up childhood. But she grew up sure she'd be a fainter, and she wanted witnesses. Definitely not me, but I was who was closest when you left. She called asking for an affixation buddy, so they made me go back to look after her until her parents could get there. His eye wasn't focused on Alden's face anymore. He was staring across the room toward the window. She faked it. When I walked up, she was lying there on her side like she'd fallen off the bench she was sitting on. I wasn't surprised. I was really used to her being special, too, so I just thought she was an idiot for not going to sit on the grass before she gave the system the okay. And then I saw her rubbing her cheek on the gravel below the bench to give herself scratches. To make it look more like she'd fallen. Oh my God. Alden felt embarrassed just hearing about someone else getting caught doing that. What on earth did you say? You know, Luke said slowly, I think I was going to let her get away with it. She oscillated between ignoring me and tormenting me when we were kids, so I didn't feel sorry for her. But me getting the chain rest was soul-crushing for Hazel. It had been saved for years especially for her. The family paid a different new about every couple of months to sit on it for her and then pass it off, just waiting for the day when she'd be selected. I actually have another cousin who got wanted chainer, and had to take another class instead. Because even though Hazel had just turned 16, everyone still thought. Maybe. Probably. Sometimes the system picks you late. Luke's frown deepened. So I wasn't going to say anything. Because even though I didn't want it, I did end up with a toy that we all thought had her name on it. And I wasn't nice about it because Hazel was never nice to me. And then there she was rubbing her own face in the dirt. It was enough. I didn't feel the need to grind it in anymore. But you did. Alden guessed when Luke went quiet. A couple of days later we were having a party to celebrate her affixation. A big family bash in her honor. She decided to cap the festivities off with a reenactment of one of those times she tormented pathetic little Luke. He shrugged. I should have left it alone. But when she did it, she was trying to set me off. She just didn't know I had such humiliating ammunition to send back her way. And you advised me recently to go to one of your family parties. We have them all the time, and the catering is always perfection, said Luke. Just go say hi to Grandma, act like a typical teenager who's at least mildly interested in rubbing shoulders with the super rich, then vanish. And don't engage with Hazel. That's my only advice for dealing with her. I don't think I'll go at all. Unless Natalie is the one catering, then I have to ponder it. Suit yourself. Luke got up to drop his bowl in the sink. Did you like the tutoring session? Yes. Thank you. It's really helpful to have an in-person teacher. It was going to decrease the time it took to learn by a lot. And you still want to master this word chain? If you don't mind tutoring me more and getting permission from your boss. Cool. In that case, what time does your class end tonight? The PE that you're all stressed about. They were all a little stressed. The very brief course description said it was just physical education and magic development, so there was no real reason to be. But everyone in the group was anxious about it being something intense. Because the last time they'd been in the gym had been so intense. Even the ridiculous and fun hour Alden had spent with the B-list hadn't quite been enough to take the edge off his nerves. It's over at 7 p.m. And it's almost 1 o'clock now, said Luke. Perfect. I'll bestow self-mastery on you. It lasts a little less than 6 hours, so it'll carry you through the rest of the day and most of your class. You can see what it's like to live with it." Alden was startled. He didn't know why it hadn't occurred to him to ask Loot about that. He had a skill that let him bestow word chains on groups of people. It would be weird if it didn't work on a single individual, too. "Can you give me the debt, too?" "I can give you the debt later if you're willing to accept it," said Loot. "I don't mind just giving you the good part." "I'll pay my own bills," said Alden. "And it's great to be able to know what it feels like before I commit to learning it." And there was the gremlin to consider. Alden didn't think it would care about this, since someone else was responsible for the missing half of the chain. But if it was offended by the process, he'd need to take both halves to make it shush. Loot smiled. A second later, Alden felt himself being targeted. That, he had expected. What he hadn't expected was to suddenly have a very clear sense of Lootvolra's power, reaching out toward him and stopping just short of touching him, like he was politely waiting for Alden to start up an authority control exercise. "That's not it. I think this is just his skill bringing us closer. It must be." Accept word chain from Loot. Primary word chain effects: heightened awareness of body, heightened control of body, heightened spatial awareness. Approximate word chain duration: 5 hours 49 minutes, yes no. He hadn't expected giving permission through his interface to be part of it either. "You should be getting a notification." Alden was suddenly nervous about what was going to happen when he accepted. Not about the effects of the word chain itself, but what was Loot going to do to him to give it to him? Alden couldn't ask because the answer was just going to be, "What do you mean?" "I'm just going to use my skill." Duh. But Loot being close in this way implied that some kind of metaphysical touching beyond simple targeting was about to take place. And while Alden was almost positive it wouldn't be damaging to him in any way, he really wished he knew if the best owl skill was about to give him a kibby-sized friendly pat or a sharp stab or what. Also, Loot was noticeably strong. Nothing at all like the overwhelming forces the primary or his sister had been. But Alden could still sense that a more powerful presence was right beside him, taking an interest in him. "Oh fuck it. It's getting more awkward and nerve-wracking the longer I wait to do the obvious thing." He commanded himself to hold still, accept the skill, and not authority smack his helpful roommate in a panic if anything weird happened. Then he selected yes. Loot's skill brushed against him. Alden had a split-second impression of something being passed to him, and either he'd gotten it right when he told himself to be accepting or Loot's skill was really great at its job, because there was no resistance when it became part of him. The skill withdrew, and Alden couldn't find any evidence of what had happened at all. Authoritatively. "I guess it's subtle. Or not, and I'm still too much of a beginner when it comes to understanding what goes on with myself in this way." He hadn't even been able to identify the carriage keys in his affixation until she told him to look for it, so it wasn't that surprising. "Still, it's odd that someone can give me something, and I can't find it. You look really tense. It's over. You can relax." Loot's expression was amused. Alden felt himself start to blush. He didn't want to. He stopped it. Oh. The mild feeling of embarrassment didn't leave, but a blush was banishable. It had taken thought and effort, but thought and effort had never worked that way for him before. "Dude. How strong is this word chain? Neat, right? Just a warning. There are some inconveniences. You've got amazing control over your body. Anything you should be capable of doing or noticing on your best day ever will suddenly be much more natural for you. On the flip side, a lot of things that go on with your body aren't actually enjoyable, and heightened awareness of them is either maddening or disgusting." He glanced at Alden's empty plate. "I'm not someone who does a lot of exercise, but I think it's going to be great for a performance in your Hero PE class. And I suspect it's good for developing muscle memory. But it can make everyday stuff hyper-annoying." Alden suddenly realized what he meant. "My own breath is burning me," he said, fanning his face. "The garlic is everywhere." Loot snickered. "Yeah. I'm not sure if you actually taste it better, but you're definitely better at being constantly aware of it. So have fun with that. If you can't stand the side effects, Call me, and I'll come take what's left of the chain back. What would that involve on your end of things? Do you just save it in a special chain or box for later? Or do you delete it from the universe? Lute slapped his own butt dramatically. Alden blinked. Is that your new way of indicating your family tattoo? If you're going to keep asking lots of questions about Chainer, I need a quicker method for blaming all I for my non-answers. Like I said, if you assume it's common sense, you'll be right most of the time. Well, I suspect you've got some kind of chain-saving magic because you delivered that one without actually doing the chain yourself. So you probably banked it somehow. That's cool. Lute, very cool guy. Now, if other people would just fall for my trap, too. Chapter 99. The word chain Lute had bestowed on Alden was fun, mind-blowing, and a total menace. He had learned to cascade juggle 5 balls from Gustavo during a couple of sleepless nights in intake. Under the effects of the word chain, he discovered he could easily do it with pieces of crumpled notebook paper while he was walking up a flight of stairs. But sitting still in his Intro to Other Worlds class was proving difficult. People were so damn noisy. His stomach was so damn busy. Friction was so damn everywhere. He kept making micro-level adjustments to himself in an attempt to get away from his own clothes. He was wriggling like an eel at his desk, trying and failing to escape from the itchy tag Satan had stitched into the neck of his shirt. It hadn't bothered him at all earlier. Now it did very much. And the waistband of his jeans was rough in one spot. And that girl making little noises with her straw while she slurped on a milkshake that was apparently bottomless. Giving up, he texted the expert. Lute, what the hell? How do you use this regularly and not murder everyone around you? His reply was a couple of tortuous minutes coming. It's not hard if something interesting is going on. It's only terrible when you're bored. The Intro to Other Worlds instructor was teaching them about sacred dirt mounds today. Nothing like a good alien dirt mound to distract you from the 8 different ways your pants fit imperfectly, not. Find something to concentrate on that doesn't make you crazy. Physical sensations are better than thoughts. He ended up practicing some of the gestures for the word chain under his desk, as discreetly as he could, and when class was finally over he raced to the nearest bathroom and used his promise stick lighting spell to burn the itchy tag out of his t-shirt. With a little too much enthusiasm. Now there was a scorched hole where the tag had been. It was a vast improvement. He had nearly 2 hours worth of study hall next. He'd been skipping it all last week, and he planned to do the same for the rest of the quarter. It was only required if your grades dropped, and he didn't see that becoming a problem with this roster of classes. 2 hours to kill. I'm suddenly extra graceful, and I need to use it. Or else I'm going to burn up all of my own clothes. But I shouldn't wear myself out before gym time, so. He'd wanted to buy a few things to have on hand for skill practice. Instead of ordering them like a rabbit of leisure, he could go get them himself and play with his new adroitness on the way. Sounds like a plan. He headed downstairs, got a small cup of ice water from the coffee shop, and shoved it in his hoodie pocket. That way failing to keep his skill active would result in some cold wet punishment. Then he headed off at ground-beating speed thanks to his trait. The word chain was definitely made for motion. The more Alden challenged himself, the more it showed off. He could hop up onto the back of park benches and walk across railings just fine without it, but with it, it was like his feet were always glued exactly where he wanted them to be. He was so alert to minor balance issues, and making rapid adjustments felt second nature. Oh. I really want to meet up with Bobby or the parkour club and show off. He had to content himself with dashing along every narrow edge he could find as he left campus behind and headed for an area that the internet said was one of Apex's best shopping spots. It was in a neighborhood with a large Chinese-speaking population, so Alden let his interface do a lot of sign translating for him. A busy boulevard lined with glossy, commercial shops gradually turned into a narrower street with more eccentric local businesses that catered to specific avowed needs. Alden was fascinated by some of the local stores, and he wished he actually needed a bunch of cool magic toys instead of the mundane stuff that was on his list. He consoled himself by promising to come back when he knew which of the mundane items he wanted particularly magnificent versions of. An hour later, he was the proud owner of one clear plastic shower curtain, a cheap bedsheet, a 4-pack of clear plastic ponchos, a roll of wrapping paper, a giant bottle of glue, a bunch of duct tape, 200 feet of orange paracord, carabiners, a bubble umbrella, and a very large lightweight nylon duffel bag with backpack carry straps. There were more items on his I should experiment with these things list, but he was running out of time, and one of the things he definitely wanted to acquire didn't seem to exist. I'm sure I am not the only guy on the island who wants a pair of thin, elbow-length gloves, he said, stepping out of a costume and party supply store. It's probably not the most common request, Jeremy told him. He had a date with his girlfriend, and he was trying to put on a tie. He had even bought one that wasn't patterned with chocolate chip cookies. Kimberly Martinez must have been special. Behind him, Victor was lounging on top of a new cat tower that Alden was sure he was going to have to find room for in his dorm sooner or later. Jeremy turned around to look at the cat every 3 seconds. None of the work gloves I tried were quite right. They made his fingers stupid. Not having stupid fingers was a big deal for spells and word chains. And surgical gloves are too short and sweaty. Plus they are going to make me look like, hi. Here I am to give you a medical exam. He had bought some disposables anyway to have in his future rabbit go bag for backups. But for regular use, he thought he wanted something fabric, very thin, and perfectly fitted. And long would be a bonus, since it would protect his arm when it was preserved. A pair of opera gloves rolled down just a little so that they didn't cover his elbows and impede motion had sounded like a decent start. What about the opera-going ladies with largish hands and forearms? It's a terrible injustice for me and for them. Anyway, I'll find something better when I've got more time. Or just modify something. Your tie looks great. You think so? Alden nodded. And thanks for taking care of Victor. Jeremy turned around to stare at the cat again. I thought maybe I should take him to the vet. Because what if he's sick and he just doesn't look like it? But then, you know, veterinarians might not understand. Indeed. He is a complicated cat. Line of asterisks. The mood in the men's locker room was more tense than it had been on combat assessment day. The boys who were joking around were doing it with bravado that came across more as nerves than confidence, and most people were getting dressed quietly. Odd that it was so much more boisterous when we were all fighting for our places here, Alden thought, running his hand up the front of his gray unitard to seal it around him. And now that we've got them, it's subdued. Or maybe it stood to reason that the group who'd made it and had taken the trials seriously enough to pass them. Even the guys who had acted like idiots at the party must care a lot about how they performed in the Magiffies gym. Why is it a Morgan here? Someone said suddenly. Alden thought it was the Baumeister, Reinhardt. It's just class. They are not going to kick us out now. They do kick people out for poor performance. My dad said so. For failing courses and failing to level. Not for being terrible on your first day of gym. Somebody talk about something fun. Con, did someone spell you quiet? Why are some of the globies hiding in the showers to dress? Does your junk look different in other countries? In the stall next to Alden, Philly cleared his throat. I just don't want to embarrass you all. He says a few minutes before a class where he'll absolutely embarrass us. Reinhard called back. I can totally take him, Con said. I can take every last one of you. If you're asleep. Con, someone said, this class is really going to sick for you, isn't it? It's fine. There are other subtypes that aren't great at combat and rescue, so it's not like I'm the only one in school. And by 3rd year, I'm sure I'll be able to destroy you all. He can still beat up the bees, right? That sounded like Sanjay. Thanks so much, thought Alden. A few people were agreeing, but Con himself wasn't among them. We don't all know each other's abilities that well yet, so I guess it's understandable that some of them would think that surely NES could beat a B. Con didn't have any offensive or defensive abilities beyond a high-rank adjuster's physicality. And adjusters weren't known for their physicality. Him winning versus Max or Alden was dependent on circumstance. What would they let Alden use as a shield? Was there ground? How much time and space would Max be given to lay down his zones? I guess it's going to be like that no matter who you're dealing with to some extent. Years from now, when they all knew what they were doing and they'd refined their power sets, they'd still probably lose to Jeffy if they were fighting in the ocean. There were only a couple of B-rank brutes at the school, and one of them was aquatic. She had a special section on the beat list for sea days, when everyone had to practice water battles, and she suddenly became a serious problem for all the higher ranks to deal with. I don't think we're dueling each other anyway, Khan said. I asked some older students, and they said they didn't start fighting classmates until a couple of weeks in. That suited Alden just fine. By some unspoken agreement, almost everyone left the locker room together. The same phenomenon seemed to have affected the girls, because they were in a chattery group outside their own locker room, waiting for stragglers to emerge. Alden spotted Maricel. She had her back turned to him while she talked with her roommates, but he could tell by her animated hand gestures that she was in her cheerful mode. I hope she's actually feeling it. Vandy and Tayet seemed to want to be friends with her, too. His own roommate chat notification appeared, and he opened it to find Hoyu asking critical questions. Hoyu, Astrid looks different. Alden glanced at him. They were standing right next to each other, and Hoyu wasn't obviously observing the target of his inquiry. Lexi, why are you texting us here? Isn't this for roommate business? Lute, I'm interested in Astrid. Who is she? Is she beating you all up in your avowed violence class? I guess I should answer since I know the answer. Alden, she morphs them. She was going minimalist when I met her on assessment day, too. It's probably better than a sports bra. Lute, now I'm even more interested in Astrid. Lexi, I'm going to ignore notifications. I need to focus. Hoyu, it would be fun if we could text all class. I'm not good enough at mental, though. I can't do it and do anything else at the same time. They entered the gym and Mass Alden's first thought was, are they really giving us 7 instructors? The gym was fully set up and prepared for them, and the instructors, wearing their own suits, were having a last-minute discussion together in the corner nearest the locker rooms. There were 41 students, 23 boys, 18 girls. 7 instructors still seemed like a lot. Alden's second thought was, Torsten Klein is one of them. I hope he is not an asshole to me. He also recognized Instructor Marion and Big Snake. It's cool that Snake's here. They said he usually teaches third years. Wait. Instructor Waker. Call him Instructor Waker. He was absolutely going to forget. All right, everyone. Instructor Klein called, clapping his hands together once for attention. I'm glad you're all here for your first day of school. Grab a seat. No talking for the next 10 minutes while I explain this course and what we expect from you. They hastened to sit down. Before the last butts had even found their perches, Instructor Klein was standing in front of them, arms clasped behind his back. His eyes were as sharp as Alden remembered from his interview, and his salt and pepper hair looked like it had been commanded by its owner not to fall into disarray. We don't believe in wasting time here at Chilenim North, he said, his voice ringing through the gym. We accept incoming classes as often as we can, so that none of you have to cool your heels for months in a regular high school before applying. We start power training you on the very first day you arrive, even if you're a mid-quarter group. This is the School for Superhuman Talent Development. And this is the one course all of you have this term where we will be focusing on developing your superhuman talents. We don't waste your time. You don't waste ours. Alden tensed, expecting the instructor to look over at the rabbit who he literally called a time waster, but he never did. Today is the 5th of November. Between now and the day the quarter ends on the 21st of December, you'll be here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 2 hours. 21 classes. Arrive 10 minutes early, not 10 seconds late. The only excused absences are if you're on another planet or in the hospital. He gestured toward Instructor Marion, who smiled and waved. This is Instructor Marion. He'll be here on Tuesday mornings from 6 to 8. If you are struggling with something, send him a message to set up an appointment for that time slot to sort it out. You'll only have access to a small portion of the gym, and he'll only be tutoring 6 people during the Tuesday sessions. It's first come, first serve until everyone has had their chance. He scanned them all. This class period is 120 minutes long. You will be using your powers and your bodies a lot while you're here, usually until they're exhausted. If you show up too tired to move, or with your main skills and spells already depleted, we will be extremely disappointed in you. Jeffy gasped. Alden didn't know what talents the Aqua Brute had other than high-strength stats, but he wouldn't be at all surprised to find that he'd been showing off all day without considering what that would mean for class. The regular course structure will be 4 30-minute-long sessions. The idea is to get you all used to the gym and used to thinking about your bodies and your magic in new ways. We will be giving you the opportunity to experiment with your powers. The sessions will loosely mimic different types of hero work. You only became avowed in the past few months. Most of you are at least 7 years away from the start of your careers. At this point in your lives, it's more important for you to discover what you're capable of than it is to perform with perfect realism. He pointed at himself. I will be teaching you offense, single target only for now. Instructor Waker will be running the self-defense session. Instructor Marion will be teaching maneuvering and positioning. Instructor Fragment will be giving you rescue problems to solve. Alden examined Instructor Fragment. He hadn't recognized the stocky woman until her hero name was used. He knew from reading the faculty list on the school website that she was a ground shaper who specialized in saving people from building collapses. A rare, emergency work-only hero. It's a totally different lifestyle than most people here seem to want. She lived on Anzidora and got called when she was needed, a bit like Hoyu's parents, but without the collective backing and with zero expectation of showmanship when she arrived. The downside, of course, was no fame, less fortune, and no off-island address. Alden was inclined to respect her without even having spoken to her. You'll rotate between each of us in small groups. Don't dawdle when it's time to move to the next thing. Learn to shift gears quickly. Instructors Wu, Ivanova, and Foxbolt will be our floating faculty. If they pull you out to work with you on something, give them your full attention. Don't complain if they take up a great deal of your time. They know what they're doing far better than you do. He frowned at them all as if he were already anticipating complaints. We have gym etiquette. Your interfaces will always provide you with a floor status notification in this space. Additionally, when you are in here with the floor off and you see a new person enter the room, shout, "Floor off." It's a critical piece of information to be aware of at all times, so we like to have the backup call. At the moment, you're new to this, so you're naturally checking floor status all the time to make sure you're doing the right thing. Within a few months, the gym will feel like a second home, and you'll get laxer. He cleared his throat. From now on, do not use any powers or any degree of superhuman strength on the gym floor while it's off. If you want to play with a harmless talent while the floor's off, do it to the sides or up here on the bleachers. The white floor is where we do things that would be fatal elsewhere. Get it in your head that anyone visibly doing any kind of magic there when it's not on is making a potentially deadly mistake, and scream "floor off" at the top of your lungs the second you notice them. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe they're about to accidentally rip off a friend's limbs. Don't wait to find out. Finally, don't agonize over leveling. Students inevitably panic as soon as the first of their classmates gains a level. We will tell you when you need to worry, and we won't even think of telling you to worry for at least 6 more months. The system's management of any given avowed can be somewhat eccentric. Principal Sleyca has been known to pop into classes on occasion and offer her unique perspective as someone who has ranked up. But the general consensus among some of the best levelers on Earth, the ones who've seen fit to share insights with the rest of us anyway, is that hard work at the edge of your abilities always pays off. So that's what we'll be having you do. We can talk about more creative, personal endeavors to push your limits when that hard work has become a matter of course for you all. Now let's get started. Line of asterisks. The instructors didn't explain how they were breaking people into groups. Everyone just got an assignment and went. but there was obviously some thought process to it instead of random selection. One group of 10 was entirely brutes, minus the class's 2 speedsters. Hoyu was over there, looking laser-focused as Big Snake explained something to them all. Another group was mostly shapers and ranged weapon meisters. Lexi was in that one. More than half of the group was S-rank. It included Maricel, Vandy, Tiet, and Jupiter. A third group was more of a mixed bag, but they'd stuck both Finley and Winston in it together. Alden was pretty sure the group he'd been put in was the struggles to deal damage group. He, Max, Con, Everly, and Astrid were in it with 5 other students he hadn't properly met. One was actually the shaper of light who Alden had seen in the Oddbirds crowd on assessment day. I didn't realize he got in. He wasn't at the party. The light shaper hadn't actually been good at anything, but he'd been on his way to one day being good at multiple impressive things: invisibility, creating high-temperature areas. But he'd have to avoid a breakdown first. His forehead was beaded with sweat, and when Alden and Con both said hi to him, he stared at them like a deer caught in headlights. If it's this bad now, what's it going to be like when we hit the other teachers? Their group was starting with Instructor Fragment in the rescue work section. In Alden's opinion, it was the least intimidating. He tuned out the light shaper's heavy breathing and listened with interest while Fragment talked about how important problem-solving and creative skill use was for her job. She explained that they would be exploring ways to use their powers to protect other people from assault and to excavate them from dangerous areas. This is really just the most basics of the basics and your first introduction to thinking about possible uses for your magic in these scenarios. You will make mistakes, and those mistakes will teach you even more than your successes. They would be climbing a towering jungle gym of a scaffold and bringing down victims that were really 120-kilo sandbags. They were starting to talk about approaches to the problem for everyone, when Instructor Foxbolt tapped Alden on the shoulder. "Let me steal you for a minute." She winked at Fragment, revealing that she had a magical effect applied to her winged eyeliner of all things. It flashed from orange to electric blue. But this was going to be my favorite part of the whole class period, Alden thought as he stared over his shoulder to where Astrid was climbing up the scaffolding. She was moving easily, and he wanted to watch her attempt the rescue. Naturally, she had more stats than him, but Morph was one of those brute subclasses that didn't necessarily come out on top in terms of super strength. They got a lot of choices for how to develop their shapeshifting, which was one of the reasons it was such a desirable subclass. Big Little Snake was one of the most powerful superheroes around, and he showed off morph combat abilities at the absolute maximum. A lot of morphers were more into impersonation or esoteric body mods that gave them utility in specific situations. Alden followed the instructor over to the bleachers and sat down when she patted the bench invitingly. "All right," she said, picking up a tablet. "I'm Foxbolt. Adjuster. Lovely to meet you, Alden. We agreed that I would be the one to talk to you about your equipage for this course. Is there some particular object you're absolutely dying to use as a main tool?" He shook his head. Right now, he was preserving a long length of paracord, with carabiners on either end. He'd wrapped it around his left arm and wrist like a homemade bracer. He'd also brought the duffel bag full of supplies he'd just bought, since he didn't know if the faculty was expecting him to show up with things or not. "I have lots of different ideas I want to try. I don't have a favorite yet." She nodded. "The versatility of items you can use with your skill is one of your strengths, so experimenting with objects is good. But it presents some problems. If you use a different tool each day we meet, you'll never gain a decent understanding of how to work with any of them. And the instructor's advice will no longer be as useful from one class to the next because if they give you tips for defending yourself with something like an umbrella today and you show up with a sheet-shaped shield tomorrow, just bought potential sheet shields and an umbrella, they'll have different opinions on how it should be used," she continued. "So let me tell you what we suggest." She read some notes on her tablet and nodded to herself. "For offense, defense, and maneuvering, we suggest you pick a single tool or a homemade combat tool that's not much more complex than the thing you rigged for combat assessment. Take this week to figure it out if you need to, but we think you should commit to using it for the rest of term by next Monday. Feel free to ask us for advice. Even if you later discover that what you've chosen is wildly flawed, learning to work around those flaws has benefits, and it will give you ideas about what you might want to try in future courses. As for your rescue sessions, Instructor Fragment actually encourages you to bring anything you like. The more the better. She points out that in a disaster relief effort, the ability to use any everyday object at hand would be invaluable. And in such a situation, you'd likely have many people to entrust you with them. That all sounds good to me, said Alden. About a fence, Foxbolt flashed her eyeliner at him before he could finish the thought. Realistically, if we were sending you out to fight bad guys next week, we'd tell you to cover up as much of yourself with a shield as you can, and we'd hand you a solid right-mate gun. However, this is a magic development program, and firearms training would do nothing to develop your magic. We'd rather have you practice with your skill. You'll also find that you can acquire excellent marksmanship quite easily as an avowed. Your current vision and stat allocations are fine already. If you don't gain an offensive skill of some kind over the next few years, someone will shoo you off to the targeting range. It won't take you long to be more proficient with a gun than any ordinary human. Alden blinked. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. He'd been planning to ask if he could go grab a weight from the storage room so that he could tie his paracord around it and whack people in the offense portion of the class. But finding out he had a future as a sharpshooter was interesting, too. Last thing, she said. Instructor Klein wanted me to ask if you were wearing any magical equipment today. No? I thought we weren't supposed to bring things like that. He had left Joe's ring in his messenger bag with his books in system storage, and the oriat around his neck didn't count because it was more like a piece of him than a piece of equipment. She looked over toward Klein with a raised eyebrow. He was beside Jupiter, trying to explain something about ankles if the direction his finger was pointing was any indication. The Life Shaper had draped herself in fresh cuds of vines for class today. He says he thought you were moving differently than you were during combat assessment. Alden glanced at the instructor. How much is he staring at me? I've barely moved at all in front of him yet. It's a word chain. They're allowed, right? Yes, Foxbolt said. They are. A word chain you've mastered will always be there for you to use as you see fit, so we consider it to be another talent in your repertoire. Well, I haven't mastered this one myself yet, Alden admitted. My roommate's teaching it to me, so he cast it on me earlier to make sure I wanted to keep studying it. He said he could take it off. I can call him if you want. The instructor looked bewildered for several seconds, then she said, "The boy in the arts program." She laughed. I was trying my best to figure out how another student had done a word chain for you. I'd forgotten we had a chainer on campus. She lowered her voice. I think it's practical to try it out first. They can be tedious to learn. Just let me know before you get any more free ones from your roommate so that I can pre-approve them and nobody can complain. She finally let him go, and after collecting a sandbag for later, he hurried over to take his turn on the scaffolding. In the minutes he'd been away, Astrid had failed her first rescue attempt. She had tried to climb down with a bag gripped between her thighs. I squeezed the victim until his ribs cracked, and then my hand slipped and I dropped him and fell on top of him, she reported to Alden when he walked up. I think I'll try a rope next time. She gestured at the pile of supplies Fragment had given them to work with. There were things there that would obviously help. Ropes and straps. A pulley. A sandbag-fitted harness. And they'd been given video links to watch that would show them how to use any of it if they wanted. But they were supposed to be using their powers as much as possible, and they had to change tactics after they rescued the heavy bag once. No repeat rescue methods. A couple of people had already gone after Astrid. Now the Light Shaper was going up. That is a nervous person, said Astrid, watching him climb. Is he scared of heights? Before Alden could consider the question, the Light Shaper froze. He clung to the scaffold 3/4 of the way up and trembled there. Maybe the pressure got to him? Someone whispered. That's 60 seconds. Instructor Fragment called. You'll want to get a move on. They weren't allowed to take more than 3 minutes, and they were supposed to be trying for faster. A few people started calling out encouragements. Con had just come over to stand beside Alden. He shook his head. He's not moving. At the 3-minute mark, their teacher sighed. I guess we are leaving him up there. Everyone has their troubles with different assignments. Let's see if he gets a handle on himself when people start climbing up past him. She gestured, and another 120-kilo bag that had been waiting off to the side flew up to land on top of the platform. Alden, you're heading up next. If your classmate is standing in your preferred climbing route, then adapt and adjust, alright? Alden hurried over to the scaffolding, more eager than nervous for this particular assignment. He wanted to try something new, he had a plan, and he thought it would work. They hadn't been given a convenient ladder. The scaffolding was made to be more demanding than that, with certain bars arranged at difficult distances and angles. But it was nothing ridiculous. He would have climbed it easily enough even on a bad day, and with the word chain making him beautifully sure of his grips and his balance, he almost felt like he was flowing up it. It definitely made up for the period of suffering the chain had caused him an intro to other worlds. He pulled himself onto the metal grating that formed the platform at the top, unpreserved his paracord bracer, and started unraveling it as he stepped over to his assigned bag. The sausage shape made it harder to rescue, in his opinion, than an actual human would have been. I need to learn how to tie a good harness, he thought as he hastily wrapped cord around the bag in X shapes that he imagined would be slightly more forgiving than a simple belt if his passenger had actually possessed nerve endings. But this is probably faster. Alden was pretty good with string. And he was word chain blessed at the moment. His bag wrapping knowledge might not be up to snuff, but it didn't actually have to be. He'd soon made a tight, secure-looking net of rope around the bag, and if his knot tying was shoddy, it would be irrelevant as long as he kept his skill active. He lifted and preserved his cord in the same motion, and the sandbag came with it. It weighed 260 pounds. His arm said it weighed almost nothing. Instead, the authority bound within his skill strained under the weight as the bag rested on top of his shielded cord. He gave himself a few extra seconds to feel it. Acknowledging the weight is important. While watching the fireworks last night and telling the girls and Lute about his suitcase cannonball, he'd suddenly had the thought that this weightlifting trick he had found could be more remarkable than he'd realized. He thought it might be something a normal avowed with the skill at this level shouldn't be able to manage as easily as he himself did. The bearer of all burdens was older magic that had roots in sacrifice and symbolism. As he understood it, it derived part of its power from the fact that Alden was at least peripherally aware of himself laboring while he used it. Any avowed's authority was laboring while they used their talents, of course. But they couldn't feel it. Like it or not, bearer was a little different. Because an avowed couldn't detect their own struggle, it made them struggle more than they should have had to. So that it could power itself. Or maybe even so that it could truly be itself, a very wizardy-sounding idea Alden had come up with, though he wasn't enough of a wizard to fully understand what he even meant by it. So, an avowed who received bearer got the carriage restriction to start. From an ancient alien perspective, that was a helpful flashing signpost instead of a mysterious inconvenience. Move your feet. For this skill, you need to be burdened. And it wouldn't let Alden feel like he was floating preserved objects around telekinetically, even though he technically was. You have to hold it. Because you have to be burdened. And even though he had managed to mentally gymnastics his way to hitting people with his preserved items, it was clearly an inferior way to use the skill. What he was using the skill for mattered. If he preserved an umbrella and swung it at a concrete block with all his might, he'd hurt his arm. If he preserved his umbrella, and Aloysia tried to crush it with a concrete block, his power broke the concrete. The bearer of all burdens protected things, transported them, and bore their weight. He was sure he'd find more. And he also suspected he'd collect more evidence that although bearer was vast, complex, and versatile, it wasn't a skill designed for cheaters. He stared at the sandbag. It weighed more than he did, and he could hold it here one-handed. He could toss it over his head by flicking his arm. This would feel like cheating for sure. If I wasn't aware I was carrying it with my authority, too. What he was wondering was if a normal avowed could have used a preserved item as a heavy stuff carrier without some kind of physical repercussion or weakening of the magic. It was more in line with the skills theme than attacking was, for sure. The "let me take your luggage" name the system had given this skill could even be considered a hint about this use. But would it have worked this well? Alden could now fling 200 pounds around like it was a basketball. As a B rank. Would he be able to if he couldn't feel what it cost? If I didn't have my authority sense, would I be consciously sacrificing enough to make the skill strong enough to do what I'm about to? He tilted the sandbag on the back and forth by moving the rope attached to his wrist, checking that it wasn't going slide out of its quickly rigged carrier. Then he set it back down on the platform near the edge and unpreserved his rope. There were a few different ways to do this rescue, but he was choosing the one that he thought would test his powers the best. He climbed swiftly down the scaffolding. He enjoyed the word change just as much on the way down as he had on the way up. "Hey," he said encouragingly to the light shaper as he sped past. "You've got this. The realism setting is 10% today. I've felt it before. Even if you fall, it's not going to hurt much at all." He didn't have time to see how the words landed, but he hoped they helped the other boy out. "Alden. You forgot the victim," Astrid said brightly when he reached the bottom. She probably thought he'd had trouble and had to bow out. She was trying to lighten the mood. The guy who snickered when she said it was being a dick, though. "Nah," said Alden, smiling. "I'm bringing him down right now." Their instructor was staring up at the platform intently. "This is totally going to work. There's no reason it shouldn't." Alden preserved the paracord, and as soon as it stiffened, he lifted it over his head. The snickerer looked startled. Astrid stared from Alden up the frozen paracord line to the bag held at the top. "It looks like a giant balloon," Everly Kim exclaimed, sweeping a strand of silver hair out of her eyes as she looked up. "That's so neat. It's harder on my skill than I thought it would be now that I'm down here," Alden noted. He carried his preserved string and its high-altitude burden to the edge of the area that had been set aside for the rescue group's use. Working with an inflexible straight line of this length did present some problems, and he was sure Instructor Fragment wouldn't approve of him setting the victim in the middle of another pack of students who were practicing their powers. The rest of his rescue classmates had jogged after him. He started to lower his arm carefully. "You'll need to go even slower, Alden," Instructor Fragment said with a touch of amusement in her voice. "And be careful of how you move your wrists. We want to place the victim gently on the floor, and with this method, it will be quite easy to drop him like the head of a hammer instead." "Yes, ma'am. And you're rotating him now," Khan said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "The poor man's getting further traumatized. He is unconscious," Alden protested. "We already established that. Maybe he woke back up when you turned him into the world's largest sausage on a stick." Instructor Fragment chuckled. She seemed to have a good sense of humor, and it was making most of the group loosen up. Alden had to admit there was some resemblance to a giant cocktail wiener stuck on the end of an even more giant toothpick. But it was still awesome. He stared at the bag the whole time he lowered it, trying to be considerate about momentum and still meet his 3-minute deadline. It touched the floor. Gently-ish. "I think that counts as a rescue," Instructor Fragment announced. Astrid punched Alden in the shoulder. Everly clapped. Max gave him a thoughtful look. Because he was Max, and staring thoughtfully at everything was what he did. The teacher waved another bag up onto the scaffold. "Con, this one's for you." Alden grinned at Con, who cracked his knuckles dramatically. "Yup. Here I go. Off to use my awesome adjuster powers to carry that heavy guy on my back and hope I do not fall." Line of asterisks. The last few minutes of rescue class was a free-for-all. Alden hadn't been expecting that, but Instructor Fragment said she couldn't send them off to their next teacher looking like she hadn't given them a workout. "Many of you were trying to be careful and sensible the first time up," she called from where she was riding a sandbag up to pry the light shaper off the scaffold. "Now it's time for you to try more ideas out. Speed run through as many as you can in the next 6.5 minutes. Come on, young man. Let go now. We all have bad days. As soon as Fragment hit the floor, she lifted her arms, and the bags started soaring up to land on the platform. She draped a couple of them across bars, too. Go, she said. Find out what you can and can't do when you're really rushing. They all raced toward the scaffolding. Alden was right behind Astrid and Con. Both of them had thrown caution to the winds. They were forcing their way up more than climbing. Astrid was jumping from precarious perch to precarious perch, barely pausing to finish pulling herself up before she flung herself higher. Damn, she's fast when she wants to be. He felt sure she would die more often than not climbing this way, but it was still something to see. Con was being more moderate than her, but he was taking a lot of risks, too. Guess I should push it as well. Leaping and swinging as fast as he could from one angled metal bar to another instead of choosing his hand and foot holds would be stupid under normal circumstances, but Fragment had said to find out what rushing was like. Alden crouched on a bar that was connected to the corner of their scaffold jungle gym at a 45-degree angle, holding himself steady by gripping the vertical corner pole. He eyed the route ahead of him. If he jumped there, then swung himself over. He tried it. His body flew almost exactly the way he expected it to. His hands landed in almost the perfect spots. He had worn his parkour shoes today, and he felt light on his kickoffs and glued on his landings. Are you part monkey? Con called as Alden caught up with him and then passed him. Rocking a new word chain, Alden said between breaths. It makes me better at controlling my body. Which one is that? One Lute's teaching me. Con grunted. The scaffold shook beneath them. Alden heard someone yell. He didn't pause to see who it was. He pulled himself up onto the platform. Con popped up right behind him. Astrid and a couple of others were already there working on their bags. I'm going to rescue you this time, my man. Astrid told hers cheerfully as she tied a rope around it with strangling force. Alden was working hastily with his cord again. He was going to strap it to himself and carry it down this time instead of going for the sausage on a stick route. Everly reached the top of the platform and stared at one of the bags with a resigned look on her face. You can do it, Con said encouragingly. She looked like she weighed about 100 pounds herself, less than half of what the bag she was supposed to rescue did. As an A-rank adjuster who was just starting out, her stats wouldn't be high. She could lift the bag, but she couldn't carry it easily. Much less climb with it. She had tried with a rope, harness, and pulley the first time, but now what was she going to do? She's got ice spells, thought Alden. Adjusters had extensive spell lists, so it wasn't like he knew everything on them. But he had at least skimmed over all the well-known ones for higher ranks, and he couldn't think of any freezing spells off the top of his head that would help much with this task. He hoisted his own, physically weightless bag onto his back and started his climb down. When he had made it about halfway, a length of rope fell down beside him. He looked up to see Everly aiming a spell at the top of it. So she is freezing it after all. He didn't see how that was going to help, but at least she had a plan. His feet hit the floor. That's a rescue, Alden, called Instructor Fragment. Get back up there. Get one more. On the opposite side of the scaffolding, he saw someone else's victim being lowered in a harness. It was a really obvious rescue method that didn't utilize powers at all. He hated to do the same thing, but it was hard to come up with fresh ideas in a hurry. He started climbing again. If I had a long enough tarp I could make a ramp? Like a sliding board. Though the victim might have a rough roll down it, which was less than ideal. Actually, what would a tarp or sheet that big weigh? And could I get it into the right shape without it flying all over the place? Also, it would be humongous. Size did matter with his skill. And now he was thinking that the distance he extended his protective magic from his body did, too. He had noticed it a couple of times before, and the first sandbag rescue confirmed it in his mind. He was fatiguing himself a lot faster when the paracord was extended a long way than when it was coiled around his arm in a tidy bundle. Even if he could preserve a really massive sheet ramp, he probably couldn't do it for long. and massive objects are more likely to take impacts. So much surface area for things to smash into. At some point I'm going to have to start doing math. That sucks. He was interrupted from his thoughts and his climb by the appearance of Everly. Even though he knew he was short on time, he couldn't help but stare. What the hell? She was a couple of yards above him on his right. Her rope was stiff and completely covered in a thick, glossy sheet of ice. And she was walking down it. Sideways. Sort of walking anyway. It was more like her feet, completely bare and flashing pale blue toenail polish, were adhered to it, and gravity was giving the rest of her a really hard time. She was in a half squat, and she had the sandbag death grip to her side, opposite the floor far below them. It was being held more by her body than her arm. But her body isn't being held by anything, is it? Except her feet. Alden recognized the spell she was using now. Glaze object. It completely coated objects in a layer of ice, which was why Everly had decided to use a rope rather than the scaffolding itself. The scaffold was probably too large for the spell to encase, and if it couldn't encase the thing she had targeted, it wouldn't work. Her skill must have been that one that gave you traction control on ice. He couldn't think of the name right now, and he hadn't ever imagined it being used this way. Everly, purple-faced and breathing hard, carefully slid one foot down the iced rope, a little closer to the floor. She shifted her weight, bent her knee, and slid the other. Isn't that brutal on your ankles and knees? And your abs? And everything? The gym suits didn't prevent muscle fatigue or soreness. Alden knew from experience. All right, everyone. Stop focusing on your classmates' magic, and start focusing on your own. Fragment's call made Alden realize he'd forgotten about his rescue mission to stare. At least I'm not the only one, he thought as he hastily resumed his ascent. He spotted at least 3 other people who had paused to watch the girl's progress. Just as his hands grasped the edge of the platform, a pair of sneakers stepped beside them. Max was staring down at the floor below. Alden had noticed him laying rope down in a rectangle beside the scaffolding earlier. He assumed the other boy was outlining a zone. "What are you going to do?" Alden asked, as he pulled himself up. Still staring down instead of at him, Max said, "I was going to throw the victim down, but that won't really tell me anything. I know it will slow the fall, but it might still be lethal." Then he wrinkled his nose, sighed, and jumped. A few people yelled. They had whenever someone had fallen from up high. It was an unnatural thing to see. Alden's own stomach clenched. Max slowed before he hit the floor. The pool zone, Alden thought. Max was using it like a diving tank. It looks like he still hit pretty hard. 2 minutes left, shouted Instructor Fragment. Another sandbag landed beside him. A new rescue method in 2 minutes? He was curious about what would happen if he tried to preserve the bag and jump with it, but he felt like if he could get that right, it was going to take more than a single attempt. "I mean, I guess I can just try and lower it." "Oh God," Khan groaned, flinging himself up onto the platform and then looking down at his girlfriend. She didn't have the upper body strength to get the bag down, so she went with magically gluing herself to an ice pole so that she couldn't fall. "My whole body hurts just watching her. Or maybe my whole body really hurts. You saved 2 bags with 0 spells. You can be proud." Alden started wrapping up victim number 3. "Preserve me and time skip me to the end of class. You're always asking me to carry you." Instructor Plum made it sound fun. "Also, whoa. Your skill is way more useful than you made it look previously." "Thanks. It's only because I figured out the weight thing." "Oh. I could try something like a zip line? Crap, I should have brought up more supplies. We're doing this again on Wednesday. I heard her telling our glow boy that he'd have a chance to retry. It seems like heights are his nemesis." Con was harnessing another bag. "I'm glad to have another chance, but I don't know how much more creative I can be. I climbed with it on my back down the bars. I slid with it on my back down a rope, which I don't recommend. I think I wouldn't have hands anymore if I really tried that without magical protective gear. Now I'm lowering it on a rope. Rope lowering does seem like the easiest solution." I guess for Wednesday I can learn how to properly upsile. If we're in the same group again, we can try teamwork. Teamwork? She didn't say we couldn't help each other after the first round, Alden pointed out. You can ride my zip line holding a victim. Coincide. That's you working and me being at a carnival. You're assuming I actually know how to make a good zip line. I don't think I can get the length I'd need to give anyone a gentle landing.